Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for joining us for UNLV Arts Worldwide.
UNLV Arts Worldwide.
UNLV Arts.
UNLV Arts.
UNLV Arts.
UNLV Arts Worldwide, made possible by the Stu and Harriet Lipoff Technology Fund.
Hello, Louis, and hello, our audience, our dear audience. Today we have a really special episode because the opportunity to interview Marianne Carter, who is the national leader of the arts at this time in the United States of America, is a privilege. She was very forthcoming about her views and her position and all the good that she can do for the arts at this time. Whether or not there's a pandemic, she has an incredibly important responsibility. But Louis, I found her optimism and her respect for artists just inspiring.
Yeah, Nancy, this was such a great moment, simply because just the opportunity to get the chairperson of the National Endowment of the Arts to talk to us is one thing, but to get them in a moment when the arts are in such a transitional time, and so many things are going on, I find her vantage point of the arts inspiring and honest, and also just her ability to want to connect the arts together and her vision for the arts is just incredible. So this was what a great episode.
You know, there are a couple of things we've been saying all along in our series. First of all, that the arts are essential. And secondly, that this is a time of reinvention and really coming up with ideas that will persist after the pandemic subsides. And those are two of the issues that she brought up as well. And then I brought up, and I think you and I both see her as a person who has a generosity of spirit. You know, she wants to go to the wall. She wants to do everything she can to maximize the good that she can bring to the country during her term as chairperson of the National Endowment for the Arts. And I think we both find that a very inspiring attribute, Louis.
Yeah, and I also have to just, I love her love of UNLV and her love of Las Vegas, that she really appreciates the artwork that we foster here in our communities. So it's great. Exactly.
She really does. And I know that you and I both remember a couple of years ago meeting her for the first time, and she just exudes this wonderful sense of energy and possibility.
The National Endowment for the Arts was created to nurture American creativity, to elevate the nation's culture, and to sustain and preserve the country's many artistic treasures. At its core, the National Endowment for the Arts is a grant-making agency, with more than 80% of its annual budget distributed as grants and awards to arts projects in each of America's 435 congressional districts, including the District of Columbia and America's 5 territories. The National Endowment for the Arts is committed to ensure that every American in every community, in every neighborhood, has access to the arts. Almost 2/3 of its grants go to small and medium-sized organizations, with 40% of its activities taking place in high-poverty neighborhoods and 35% reaching underserved populations, such as veterans, the disabled, and those in rural areas. Over the last half-century, the National Endowment for the Arts has supported epic projects and some of America's most enduring. Poetry Out Loud, a national program that encourages the study and dynamic presentation of great poetry recited by high school students from across the nation. Its folk and traditional arts funding celebrates and supports art projects that are as creative and diverse as America itself. Our Town, the National Endowment for the Arts signature program that supports partnerships with local artists, arts organizations, and municipal governments, all to improve and revitalize neighborhoods. And its eminently popular Blue Star Museums program, in partnership with Blue Star families and more than 2,000 museums in all 50 states, provides free admission to active duty military personnel and their families. Today, the National Endowment for the Arts continues to move forward as a pioneer, partner, and supporter of innovative and exciting new perspectives on art, such as its Creative Forces Community Connection projects. The National Endowment for the Arts collaborated in the creation of a national program linking returning service members suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder with art that has produced results that are as deeply moving as they are profound in advancing recovery. The National Endowment for the Arts, a legacy of success for all of America.
This is UNLV Arts Worldwide, and we have the distinct pleasure today to be with Marianne Carter, who is the chairman of the National Endowment of the Arts. Marianne, welcome and thank you for being on our program.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. You know, I have a lot of ties to UNLV, so I'm happy to be here.
Well, it was wonderful meeting you. Both Nancy and I met you last summer, and you just came into Vegas as a breath of fresh air. There was a dance workshop going on in the dance department, and your daughter McKinley was there taking the class, and it was just really great meeting you. Don't you think, Nancy?
Louis, I was excited. Marianne came to the historic Fifth Street School in Las Vegas, and she met with all of the arts leaders in the region. And I was one of, 20 or 25 people sitting around this kind of horseshoe table, and I was very excited. I think I came up to say hello right before we had our session, and she mentioned you, and she mentioned UNLV to everyone, and I was so proud, because obviously there's so many great projects going on in Las Vegas, and we have great arts leaders. And the fact that Marianne mentioned UNLV just warmed my heart, and it made me feel proud that our university could be among, the different entities that were there at the meeting. I think we all felt very honored to have Marianne here and to give us her sense of the future and the vision of the NEA. So yes, Louis, I agree with you. It was a marvelous experience to meet Marianne.
So
I'll tell you a funny story about Vegas. My daughter does dance intensives every summer, and we usually do New York. And a couple years ago, we couldn't make New York based on our circumstances. So we saw that there was a similar dance intensive in Vegas by the same group. And so we went to Vegas. And then following January, when we're starting to make plans for summer, I said, okay, what week should we go to New York? And my daughter said, I don't want to go to New York. I want to go back to Vegas. So Vegas it's been now for the past 3 years for us.
It's wonderful.
Well, we're thrilled. And I know Louis we both enjoyed watching your daughter dance. And, I think that brings up your deep engagement with the arts. And I know that Louis and you have had some conversations about that.
Yeah, Marianne, tell us, what has brought you to the arts originally?
Well, I don't have a background in the arts. And so I came by it in an entirely different way. When my daughter was 7, she was diagnosed with dyslexia. And so I started looking around the country for schools that specialized in kids with dyslexia because she learns differently. And I knew a traditional school environment wasn't going to work for her. So I found a school, and they integrate arts into the learning process. And I don't mean it's a performing arts school. The teachers actually integrate arts into their teaching method. So she'll learn visually or musically. And it just made a huge difference in our lives. And I realized the importance of, not just an arts class per se, but integrating arts into our everyday lives. And so, so it became a really passion for me to try to get people to understand that arts are not a luxury. They're actually a fundamental part of our everyday life. They certainly are in my family. And so that's sort of how I came into the field.
Wonderful. It
is so wonderful. Louis and I are thrilled to hear you share with us this beautiful story, because in fact, you may know that from the beginning of our series, we've always said the arts are a fundamental part of people's lives. They are not a luxury, they are essential. And we talked about essential workers during the pandemic. We felt that this is a part of life that should not be left behind for people during this time. So I think there's a real connection between the way you share, the way you've told your story and your own observation about how important the arts were as an integrated part of your daughter's education. And it really is inspiring what you said.
And when you think about the pandemic now, no one has survived without the arts, whether it's reading a book, whether it's listening to music, whether it's painting, whether it's just sitting around doodling. The arts are what have gotten us through this. And I hope that there is now a bigger realization of how important this is to our everyday lives. And one of the things I talk about that doesn't get as much attention is with all these artists out of work and our arts organizations closed, what that is actually doing to society and individually to our communities. Because, these are the people who are in our schools working with our kids. They're in our senior centers working with our seniors, especially those with dementia and Alzheimer's, who are already so isolated. And, imagine how much more isolated they are because of the pandemic. These are the people working with our veterans recovering from traumatic brain injury and PTSD. And so there are significant consequences to our artists and our art organizations being shuttered and out of work.
Yeah. How has
Very true.
Marianne, how do you see the arts? I mean, I think you have such a incredible vantage point from your job and your position to look at all of the arts. How do you see artists surviving right now? What are you doing? What are some of the success stories and what are some of the difficulties?
Well, let's start with the difficulties. Let's start with the bad news first. So it's devastating. It's devastating across the nation, across the world, really, but certainly here in the United States. Arts organizations, concert halls, theaters, any type of artistic venue, typically the first to close, the last to open. And we're seeing that. So that's been problematic. So many people, when they think of art venues, they think of the big ones, the Smith Center, for example, in Las Vegas, or Lincoln Center in New York. But the backbone of the art community are our small community arts organizations. And they already struggle, and they already basically budget on a shoestring. So it's been devastating for them. And as I just mentioned, these are also the organizations that are really working within the community, and they have huge impacts on their community. So we're losing out on all of that. So obviously, so many artists immediately got cut off from any jobs that they had. And artists are gig workers. So many of them literally work job to job. And so when they're not working, there's no income coming in at all. And, when you think of the domino effect on people as well, so for example, when a theater closes, it's not just the actors and actresses that are out of work, it's all the people behind the scene also. It's the costume makers, it's stage managers, it's the AV workers, it's the people selling tickets, it's the people collecting the tickets, it's the people selling the food and drinks out front. Restaurants take a hit, and if people are coming overnight to stay, hotels are taking a hit. So it really has a huge domino effect. And but on the one-on-one level, the financial hit to individual artists, who so many have families, has just been incredible and devastating. Now, there have been a couple things to help. There's been the PPP. Theaters have been able to apply, not just theaters, but other artistic venues have been able to apply for help. There are a lot of relief funds that have been set up. The Actors Fund is one that comes to mind immediately. And of course, there was the CARES Act. which provided funding in different ways, and in particular for the National Endowment for the Arts, it provided $75 million for us to help organizations across the country survive. And so by law, 40% of that automatically went to the states. So that was about 30 million. And then 45 million we directed in grants. And we have a huge process. Usually takes about 6 months. This was so critical that we actually were able to get it all done in 2 months.
Fantastic.
And we had, you still had to apply, and then your applications are juried. And so anyway, it's, like I said, it's a pretty big process. We had over 3,100 applications. We were able to provide 855 grants, direct grants. So you can see the demand is so much greater than the supply. When you add in the state's portion of the money, we do expect between 5,000 and 6,000 organizations to receive some type of financial help, but it's still not enough. So there's that. And then on our website, arts.gov, we have a resource page. So whenever we hear about a relief fund, we put it up there. And so there's all sorts of information on various funds, what other organizations are doing. We had links to some of the other government websites on how to apply for their relief. And we also surveyed the service organizations. This was back in May, and it was more of a, where are you right now? What are your fears? What are your anxieties? Where are you on reopening plans? And we're going to do a follow-up next month. Where are you now? Because we do see some venues starting to open, and you know, I'd like to get a better idea of how did you open, what would you have done differently? Our audience is there, our audience is coming in, because reopening is fine, but if you don't have people walking through the door, you know, you're still in a world of hurt. So you know, everyone wants to help, everyone's trying to help. It's just that the devastation has been so great that it's going to be a while before the arts field is really back to whatever the new normal is going to be.
And what have been some of the things the arts have discovered during this time? I mean, Nancy and I always talk about the resiliency of artists and how even in the bleakest times, they find ways to make things happen. What have been some of your favorite moments?
Well, creative people are always going to create. It doesn't really matter what is going on because it's who they are. And so, so we're still going to see beautiful art. We're going to hear beautiful music. I actually think coming out of this pandemic, we're going to see some of the best art we've ever seen, because the isolation is something everyone can relate to. Like, everyone was a part of this. You know, we see devastation happen with hurricanes and other disasters, but most of the time we're a spectator in it. Everyone is a participant in this. And so I think everyone will be able to relate. And that's what an artist wants. They want their audience to be able to relate. And so I'm actually very optimistic about the art that is going to come out of this. So a couple interesting things. One, both artists and art organizations are finding new audiences. And that's key. That's key for any artist and any arts organization. And most of it is because the other good thing that came out of this is they all had to pivot online.
Right.
And you know, some were already prepared to do that and already had a pretty robust online presence, but many didn't. And so they're learning the ropes and they're figuring it out. They realize their archives are a treasure trove. And so they're able to broaden an audience and broaden the amount of work that they can now share. Now, one of the keys is going to be, how do you turn this into an economic advantage? You now have this huge bigger audience that you didn't have. You've opened up eyes that for a lot of people who probably have never stepped in a theater or never stepped in a concert hall. So how do you then get them through the door once our venues do reopen, and how do you keep them engaged? So that's a challenge, but that's actually a really good challenge to have. And the other thing that is fairly interesting is, you know, all the arts disciplines, they all have service organizations, which all have annual conferences. And these conferences are typically in person, but they all moved to online this year. Well, what the service organizations found was they were getting 2, 3, 4 times as many registrants, because people didn't have to physically go, they didn't have to pay for hotel rooms, they didn't have to put on all those extra costs that come along with an in-person conference. And because of that, when you have 4 times as many people within your art discipline networking in a conference, that can only be good for the arts community. So those are a couple of things that I would point out that at least have a silver lining to this pandemic.
Those are really fantastic and great. And, you know, actually it points to one of the things I think you are fantastic at, Marianne, is connecting people together with, you've connected me with several other people in the dance world just because of shared interests. So I think that's kind of wonderful, and how many of us have connected in these online venues because of this pandemic moment. Yeah.
Marianne, I think as a leader, you have done so much to create this optimistic vision for the future. I also want to say that you personally have a generosity of spirit that I sense, that you always, both as a professional, as a human, you want to go to the max. You want to do as much as you can always. I've sensed that about your ability to help people, and I was reminded of it when Lewis talked about the connections that you help people know one another so that they can have synergy, so they can work together to create something special. And I think it's a great attribute. I just want to say you are in your working life on top of everything. I mean, you know everything going on in this country. So you are in a great position to be able to do that, but it also takes something, this other attribute. It isn't just the knowledge that you have, it's the willingness and the feeling of possibility, I think, that drives you to help people know one another. And I want to say we really appreciate that about you.
Well, thank you. I believe the arts unite. I don't think it matters who you are or where you're from. And I just believe in connecting people. This is a shared interest. So why wouldn't we all, want to participate in some way? And so, I'm just a believer that if I can help connect people, I will. And, I have a term, I'm not in this job forever. And so I have a finite amount of time to really work hard and do what I can. And so I'm going to take full advantage of that.
Yeah. And
we certainly notice that. And I think it inspires us, because I think that when any of us models behavior that is positive and optimistic and helps the arts and helps life happen better, it gives us, all of us, ideas about how we can do that as well. So thank you for being that model.
And Marianne, we should take this moment to recognize the big project the NEA has just accomplished in the midst of pandemic, the book on the women's suffrage movement. Please tell us about that.
So on August 26, we celebrated the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment being ratified to the Constitution, which was women's suffrage, giving women the right to vote. I will note that although the amendment was supposed to give all women the right to vote, in reality, all women were not able to exercise their right to vote, especially women of color. And so we note that in the book, and I just want to note that here as well. but it is a very significant milestone, and it paved the way for women to be able to do so much more, especially in other movements like the civil rights movement. And so it really was a major accomplishment. So, and arts really played a role in swaying public opinion on giving women the right to vote. And whether it was fashion or postcards or acidic cartoons, poetry, prose, song, even movies, the arts really helped change the narrative of what a woman was. And, you know, the arts have this unique ability to take very complex messages and break them down into a very easy to understand format, sometimes even with just a visual. So we wanted to, I'm going to show the book if you don't mind.
Oh, please.
We wanted to take all the wonderful art that was done throughout the decades leading up to women's suffrage and put it in a book and write about how important it was. So we created this book, Creativity and Persistence, Art That Fueled the Fight for Women's Suffrage. And it's available on our website at arts.gov. You can download it. And we also have it on audiobook. But we have over 117 images in there, some iconic, some that people will recognize, but others that people don't. And we also talk about some of the really important figures in the time period. And so I'm really proud of it, really proud of the 100-year celebration as well. And so thank you for mentioning it.
Absolutely. It's I can't wait to get my copy. So put it on my, read it.
One's coming.
Oh, one.
I love the fact that you've emphasized, and the team that put this together have emphasized the role of the arts in civic and civil life. And, you know, and as a catalyst for social change in our world, which I think it's always been, but this is a wonderful example of that. And thank you for that.
Well, Marianne, is there anything else you want to tell us about the NEA? I just personally want to also thank you because organizations like the NEA have been such a resource for many of us during this time of pandemic. You know, I have visited the NEA sites, I've visited Dance USA, and there have been such vital information for how to get through this time that your organizations have provided to arts organizations and educational organizations. So I really want to thank you for that. But is there anything else you want to tell us about the NEA and what's happening in Washington?
So, so thank you for that, Louis. One thing I always say is we're in this together because we truly are in this together. And so we've used a lot of stuff from Dance USA as well. In fact, I feel like they've sort of been leading on a lot of the reopening, especially. Mm-hmm. And so, so we're really proud to work with them. You know, a couple things that I have focused on since my time here, and ironically, a lot of it has parlayed into this time period we find ourselves in. But one of the key things I wanted to do was start shattering some of the myths about the National Endowment for the Arts and art in general, such as we only fund elitist institutions. We actually, a third of our money goes to organizations with budgets under 500,000, and another third goes to what we would call medium-sized organizations. And we also fund all 435 congressional districts. So we're not on the East Coast or the West Coast, we're actually all across America. Mm. And it's really important that we get that message out because that's not what people necessarily think. It's also been really important to me to make sure we outreach to typically underserved communities. And that includes veterans. It includes people with disabilities. It includes inner cities. It also includes rural America. And in particular, historically Black colleges and universities. So we've developed plans around all of those constituencies to make sure we are reaching everyone, because the mission of this agency is to make sure all Americans have access to the arts. So we have to make sure that we're there. One of the other myths I really like to shatter is this argument against public versus private dollars. Because, you know, you've heard the argument, can't private dollars replace public dollars? And it's a philosophical argument. It's not that these people hate art. I always note that. And so we looked into this a little more, and we discovered that if you look at the top 1,000 private foundations that give to arts programming, they don't cover 65% of the country. So in fact, the National Endowment for the Arts is in 779 more counties than private dollars. Wow. So the answer is no, private dollars can't replace public dollars. And of course, public dollars can't do it all alone. We need both. Mm-hmm. And so again, you have to take a philosophical answer to a philosophical question, and getting that message out. And let's see. So, probably one of the other big things that we really try to push is the arts are not a luxury. They're actually an economic engine. So, we know that the arts produced in 2017, I think is our latest figures, 877 billion to the economy, more than transportation, more than warehousing, more than agriculture. So that's really significant. And it funds millions of workers. It brings in huge amounts of wage and benefits. It brings in huge amount of tax dollars. So no, this isn't just some luxury people sitting around, painting on a canvas. It's actually a true economic engine for rural communities, especially, but for all over the country.
That's music to our ears.
Yes, I mean, those are really, really important facts for us to promote, to really share with others. They're very important concepts that you shared with us. Thank you.
Yeah, it's inspiring because so often even artists can feel the myth is not real, but the myth can weigh on them. So I love that you're breaking down the myths and shattering those. That's fantastic.
We sometimes say that the myth of the poor starving artist is so pervasive. It's very hard to explain that artists are vital members of society that right now, of course, are suffering during this time. But the gig economy is coming back, and a lot of it with your help. And so, but they're vital members of civic society, just like any other worker and thinker. And so we appreciate that advocacy.
So ironically, my biggest focus had been making sure people understood how arts work with health and well-being. And so, we have a program where we work with wounded military men and women and veterans, those who have suffered some type of psychological issue in particular. We are in senior centers, as I mentioned. We have programs where we are studying how art therapy helps pediatric oncology programs. So, a child who's sitting there getting an infusion, giving them an art project. And so I love the idea of health and well-being because I think it's so important. And it was one of my first focuses when I got here. I had no idea we would have a pandemic and it would become even so much more important. But it really goes to show, getting back to what we talked about earlier, it's a fundamental part of our lives. It's a fundamental part of our health and well-being as well, whether health being an actual health issue or just maintaining health.
Such an important point. And, in our college, we also have sort of a health mandate in terms of a wonderful consortium for health and injury prevention of musicians. We have in our interior architecture program a healthcare design portfolio with a new master's degree. So I think, you know, your ideas and what you brought to the NEA is very progressive. And I want to say how important I think that is as well.
Thank you.
Well, Marianne, is there anything else you want to share with us? Just thoughts or ideas or words of wisdom for the artists out there?
Well, I would say hang in there. We're going to recover. We're going to get to the other side of this. I don't know when it will be. And I don't know what it will look like, but we'll get there. And artists will always create. Like I said earlier, that's who they are. And I am looking forward to seeing what stems from this time period in our lives, because I think it's going to be magnificent. And there are millions of people out there who want to help, who are trying to help, who are doing what they can, because millions of people understand that arts aren't just a luxury. It's not just having an 8th grade class. It is a fundamental part of who we are and what we do every single day.
Well, Marianne, thank you.
Those are really inspiring. I just want to say, Louis and I agree that these are such inspiring words. And I know Louis has some other thoughts too.
Oh, well, Marianne, I just want to thank you for all you do. And I feel like the arts across our country are a beautiful garden. And thank you for tending to the garden and keeping it all alive and passionate. I adore your passion with all of the arts.
I love your metaphor on the garden.
Feel free to
Very
use
poetic.
That's great.
so, and thank you for joining our show today. This is
Absolutely happy to do it.
A treat for
And
us.
looking forward to seeing you next summer.
Next summer,
Yeah.
I can't wait. It was fantastic to see McKinley dance last summer, and it actually gave me hope and courage to get back in the studio after not being there. And I have to tell you, Marianne, one of my favorite things I have is my NEA hand sanitizer. I use it every day and keep myself safe and keep myself dancing. So.
Excellent. Excellent. I love it.
This has been just a wonderful experience for us and for our program, Marianne. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Absolutely happy to do it.
Through its grants, the National Endowment for the Arts supports arts projects in every community across the United States, including yours. To ensure grants are distributed fairly, selecting recipients is a multi-step process. First, an organization submits an application, which includes their project's budget and plans to match grant funding, at least 1-to-1 with other donations. Then, panels of experts, not NEA staff, evaluate submissions. They assess the artistic excellence of the project as well as artistic merit, like potential impact on the field and whether it's reaching an artistically underserved community. Then panels pass their recommendations to the National Council on the Arts, which is comprised of federally appointed artists and arts leaders. They review the grants and send them to the NEA's chairman, who makes the final decision. The NEA notifies the organizations whose applications are recommended, and then the real work begins, bringing the project to life so you and your community can experience it.
Nancy, what a brilliant episode. And Marianne Carter is wonderful.
I think it's a historic episode, Louis, because we had a chance to really hear in some depth the perspectives of a national figure, who is really doing a lot to keep the arts going and thriving during this time.
What's nice is also just that sense of when she says that the arts will get through this, we'll get through this together, and we will flourish. She sees a period of art after this that is just an amazing flourishing of of our art forms. So that's so inspiring, and I agree with you. We will look back at this time in this episode, and it will mark this moment.
I think we were fortunate, and I hope that our audience enjoyed the episode as much as we did. We wish you all well. Be safe, be well, and
this is UNLV Arts Worldwide. We're reaching from Las Vegas to the world. Bye, Nancy.
bye-bye.